The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I wish I had better news to start with today, but I don't. The FCC is going to repeal net neutrality not soon, not in early 2018, not later this month, but it appears that it's going to happen today. It might have already happened by the time you listen to today's show or watch today's episode. And this is going to allow a lot of really bad things to happen, including allowing internet service providers to speed up service to some websites of their choosing or platforms as well, to slow down or outright block access to other websites or services. How despicable is it that something that Republicans and Trump will call a major win in reversing Obama-era legislation will actually be terrible for consumers? This applies to consumers of media and users of the internet. In other words, basically everybody. 83% of Americans oppose this plan. I'd argue that some of the 17% that doesn't oppose it doesn't fully understand the implications of what's going on, right? The people who actually understand what's going on with net neutrality and what it is and still want to repeal it must be way smaller than the 17%, roughly, that polls point to. And what's important to understand is that the Republican establishment was not always opposed to net neutrality. There are some Republican voters who are jumping on the bandwagon. They've basically fallen prey to the talking points of the cable lobbying industry, and they believe that it's actually a good thing to repeal net neutrality, and it's become very partisan. But if you go back to the 2015 net neutrality rules that were passed during the Obama administration, the precursor to that package was actually from the Republican George W. Bush FCC. Under George W. Bush, the FCC created some sort of general guiding principles that led to what was passed under President Obama, and those are the rules that now the Trump administration, the Trump FCC, is looking to repeal. The FCC chairman at the time was Michael Powell, the son of Colin Powell, a Republican chairman of the FCC, and he actually said in a speech that internet users should have 4 freedoms, and that includes exactly the type of freedoms that there's at least an attempt made by President Obama's net neutrality rules to provide. And again, that was a Republican FCC chairman. So this is a significant move to the right. And the backstory of what is apparently going to end today, in a way anyway, one chapter might end today, is this depressing conversation we had last week with attorney Andrew Torres, who said, bottom line, this is going to be repealed, and it becomes more a question of how will we react to this repeal of net neutrality to maybe try to restore some of the principles.
There are actually a few Republicans in Congress coming out in support of net neutrality, though, now, but it's largely just lip service at this point. It's just to appeal to their constituents who, by and large, are in favor of keeping net neutrality.
Of course.
The FCC will have the vote. It'll be 3-2, and they'll gut it. But maybe there's some hope for the future with that.
Well, I guess let's try to find some upside, right? One hope I have is that more cities and towns will look seriously at municipal broadband, right? Public internet options. There's a really interesting case from a really small, I don't know if I can even call it a town. It's kind of a village in Western Massachusetts called Leverett or Shutesbury. Now I don't remember which it is that established municipal broadband. Of course, it's much easier to do in a small municipality than it is in a city. So that's one possibility. Hopefully it will also accelerate the projects by private industry to bring free internet to everyone. Elon Musk has ideas, Facebook has ideas, and I get it. These are major corporations with financial interests in doing this. They're not just doing it out of charity. But I would argue that free internet for all outside of the internet service provider, cable lobbying industrial complex is a good thing, because repealing net neutrality, if we had real competition for internet service, wouldn't be as bad. But what we're doing, and what may have already happened by the time you hear this, is that we're repealing net neutrality, and yet most people have one option from who they can buy internet from, that they can buy internet from where they live. That's a disastrous combination. And I don't believe for a second that none of the internet service providers are going to do the things that they'd legally be allowed to do once net neutrality is repealed. We hear from these companies, these internet service providers, we would never do internet fast lanes. We would never start charging people more if they want to access independent media or Netflix or whatever the case is. Just look at Portugal. Portugal had what we sort of can call net neutrality type legislation. They repealed it, and it's been a disaster. Now in Portugal, Pat, you've got like your basic internet fee, and then if you want to use messaging type apps, you pay extra. That includes Skype. If you want to use social apps, you buy the social tier. We joke that that's what it's going to become. It's happened in Portugal.
Yeah, that's a disaster. We don't want it. But also, are you surprised that we're not seeing independent websites coming out in support of keeping net neutrality? Like for today, maybe just shutting down Google and Wikipedia and Amazon in protest, perhaps?
We've seen it. We're not seeing it today. You're right. But we did see those types of protests. We're blacking out our site to defend net neutrality or whatever. I mean, the proof is in the pudding in the sense that they did it, and we're still getting a repeal today. So this is the reality. This is what will happen. Prepare for it. Unless we vote them out soon enough to get this repeal canceled, so to speak, it could get really, really bad. And we've been covering it. I know that corporate media has not really been talking very much about net neutrality. It doesn't really serve the political aims and goals. No incentive whatsoever. We've been talking about it, but sadly, it's still going to happen. Let's talk a little bit about the sort of situation in the U.S. Senate now that we've heard from Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, that despite winning the special election 2 days ago in Alabama, Democrat Doug Jones is not going to be seated until the start of the next legislative session, which is not going to be until early January. So Democrats are now pushing back, and they're saying, okay, if you're not going to seat Doug Jones until January, then we shouldn't vote on the tax bill until January, which is the next legislative session. And the argument is Luther Strange was temporarily in that Senate seat because Jeff Sessions was appointed to Attorney General. He was previously in that seat, and that's what put Luther Strange there. Nobody voted for Luther Strange. We now have had an election in Alabama. We have someone in Doug Jones that the people selected to represent them. Why would we vote on something as far-reaching in its impact as the tax bill without having the vote of the person selected by the people of Alabama? It's a very strong argument. Senator Chuck Schumer is in on this, saying it would be wrong for Senate Republicans to jam through this tax bill without giving the duly elected senator from Alabama a chance to cast his vote. Senator Elizabeth Warren chimed in on Twitter, where she said, quote, "I call on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to listen to the people of Alabama and seat Doug Jones without any delay." Now, what's very interesting, because there's always these double standards, back in 2010, we had a special election here in Massachusetts, and Republican Scott Brown won. Both Democratic President Barack Obama and Republican Mitch McConnell at the time said we should not have major votes until Scott Brown is seated because the people of Massachusetts had their say and they should be represented by the person they voted for. All of a sudden now, though, Mitch McConnell has no interest in doing that.
Yeah, and Democrats only waited 2 weeks to seat Scott Brown, which is about the average. But I think it's more about substance than of time.
Absolutely.
He got to weigh in on the healthcare debate. And in the same way, Doug Jones should be able to weigh in on the tax debate.
However, good luck to Democrats. I mean, Republicans are completely ignoring this request. Trump is talking about getting this vote done before the end of the year. The vote on the reconciled, or call it like the conferenced bill, the tax bill, is set to happen at the end of next week. And this is actually interesting for those moderate Republicans in the Senate that might hold this up already on its merits. People like Ron Johnson, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, maybe Jeff Flake. Right now, they have this huge rush to get the bill through before Doug Jones is seated. If you're Collins or Murkowski or Flake, they need your vote now, which gives them a lot of leverage, which is interesting. I don't know what it is they might want to ask for, but if you are someone that is a risk in terms of voting for this bill, and now the Republicans need you to vote on it next week before Doug Jones takes a Senate seat, you have some leverage that you could potentially try to exercise over the Senate at large. Now, as far as the conference bill, Republicans in the House and Senate, they've agreed to a bill in committee, Both the House and Senate now need to actually vote for the bill in the full chamber. Reportedly, it contains a 21% corporate tax rate. That's a decrease from 35%, something that almost no Americans want. There's really no public outcry to lower the corporate tax rate. It's going to lower the top personal tax bracket to 37%. We've done a full analysis before of different iterations of the bill. Now we need to see what's actually in this final version. I wonder if even the people voting on it will know what's in this version.
Yeah, and if Republicans succeed here and are able to hold off seating Doug Jones, I think it just shows that they know their own tax bill is unpopular and bad policy, and this will be an admission of that.
It's actually not completely clear that getting this bill done is going to be great for Donald Trump. He would tout it as a major victory. If you believe that there will be net benefits from this bill, most economists don't. It could take years to notice them, and mostly it's going to further enrich the already richest Americans. So we've got 10 and a half months, basically, between now and the midterms. How much impact would this tax bill, if passed next week, even have on the actual economics of the average family? The PR optics of it potentially will be there, and that's going to depend not on the objective changes it causes, but on how well Trump and Republicans are able to sell this bill, and maybe Trump will be able to sell it as a success. But at a certain point, won't the lower and middle class voters realize, hey, you know what? They promised a bill, they passed a bill, but it's really doing nothing to help me. I don't know the answer to that, because voters have been bamboozled election after election, and the bamboozler in chief has been Donald Trump, going back on, what, half of what he promised he would be doing when he was running. So I don't have confidence. Let me put it a different way. If I'm expecting election results to mirror the actual impact of the legislative policies of those in power, I shouldn't hold my breath, because that's not been the way that it has ever worked. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I've mentioned before that our program is funded by the audience, and today I want to recognize Jesse Knight for being a David Pakman Show member. Membership has grown over the years, and it's really allowed the program to grow. And Jesse is today's new member of the day. You can join Jesse at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also get a free 2018 David Pakman Show calendar with all original artwork with your yearly membership. If you go to davidpakman.com/calendar18, you can also make pledges of as little as $1 per month at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. And more people now contributing via cryptocurrency. You can learn more at davidpakman.com/cryptocurrency, which also includes a link to create an account on a cryptocurrency exchange if you don't yet know how you can get involved in cryptocurrency. Check that out at davidpakman.com/cryptocurrency. I have good news today, and it's rare that I've had good financial news for the program, but I do have good news today. Earlier this week, we talked about this new fee structure that Patreon rolled out, and Patreon, of course, is this platform that we use to raise money. You can pledge any amount of money that you want on a monthly basis. You can pledge $1, $10, $100, $1,000, $100,000 if you wanted. Nobody's done that, but you could, conceivably. I think it would work. I think the system would allow that. Nobody's tried, to the best of my knowledge. And what happened about 5-6 days ago is that Patreon announced that they would be changing the fee structure. So when you make a pledge of $5 to Patreon, we don't get the full $5. There's a fee that's involved there, and it depends on the size of the pledge and a couple of other factors. And what Patreon announced earlier this week is that they were going to be shifting the burden of that fee partially towards the donors in a way that really wasn't good. It wasn't a good idea, and to compound the disaster of that, their messaging around it was also terrible. Unfortunately, it was really bad for us. We lost over 150 or even close to 200 donors who were understandably upset with the announcement from Patreon. That I told you about on Monday. Later in the week, I told you that there was glee on YouTube from haters, as we highlighted on the program, thrilled that we were losing money and had lost nearly 200 patrons. I highlighted some of those comments yesterday. Followed by really good news, which is that Patreon posted a blog post yesterday and emailed creators deciding that they are not going to make these changes. They titled their blog post, "We messed up, we're sorry, and we're not rolling out the fee changes." This is a very good thing. I'm glad that Patreon has made this decision. And part of it is because people were canceling their pledges. Patreon clearly saw, wow, we made this announcement and all of our creators are starting to lose pledges, and that's a bad thing for them. And obviously it's bad for Patreon's business as well. Now, my concern is, Pat, people see the article and they never see the correction, right? With newspapers, this is often the thing. Big article in a newspaper that ends up being something really bad. And then 5 days later on page 12, the newspaper puts out a correction and nobody sees it because they're either furious with the newspaper and they're no longer getting it anymore, or they never read to page 12.
Right, especially if they sign up for Patreon, right, and they get their newsletter, and then when they pull their support, they don't get that newsletter anymore, they don't see the update.
That's my concern, that the people who are still patrons were notified that Patreon has canceled this fee change. But the people who canceled their support are no longer receiving emails from Patreon, and therefore they would have absolutely no idea about it. So I'm here to tell you the changes are canceled. Please come back and restart those pledges. And to make it extra enticing, I want to remind you, we have this Patreon goal. And you can see this at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. When we reach 2,250 patrons, we are going to record, edit, and upload a multi-part critical thinking mini-series. Initially, it will be distributed to patrons, and then eventually it will get full distribution on YouTube. This is a really, really good mini-series we've been working on for a while. I actually have for you today, to provide some extra incentive, to prove that we're working on this. I'm going to show you the possible introduction that producer Noah Ferguson has put together for this video series. And I get it that if you're listening on the podcast or the radio, you're not going to see it. We are moving well ahead with this, and people will see that we've already got graphics. It looks really cool. We're developing a whole look for these. I believe that this is going to be one of the coolest things and most well-produced things that we do. It will be a 12 to 15 part mini-series all about critical thinking. The Patreon fee has been rolled back. The fee surge is done. Let's get to 2,250 patrons, help us recover, and then we'll continue working on this critical thinking mini-series, which I think is going to be absolutely fantastic. So patreon.com/David Pakman Show. You won. They canceled the fee surge. Now let's get those pledges restarted. Okay, you can discuss politics and the program and whatever else is of interest to you with nearly 5,000 other David Pakman Show viewers and listeners on our subreddit, which you can find at davidpakman.com/Reddit. I was browsing some of the discussion topics this morning and a lot of interesting ones I wanted to share with you. Any of these conversations that are interesting to you, go to davidpakman.com/Reddit. One post saying, Robert Mueller for president? What would you say about a 2020 run by Robert Mueller, the guy who hopefully takes down Trump? It's a very interesting idea, but no thank you.
No,
Robert Mueller needs to keep his head down, do this investigation. Don't consider what you are working on something that would lead to a political career. I think he's in his mid-70s anyway, and I don't think he has any interest in running for president. Just let the guy do the investigation. Don't talk about Robert Mueller running for president.
It just plays into this Republican idea that this whole thing is a witch hunt.
Absolutely.
Even if he does it afterwards, I mean, don't do it.
Bad idea. Fascinating, but terrible idea. Also on our Reddit discussion forum, what is the significance of Roy Moore's loss? A very interesting discussion about the implications of the fact that a Democrat won in the Alabama Senate, in the U.S. Senate from Alabama for the first time in something like 25 years. Good discussion and very timely in light of the results from Tuesday's special election. Also from the Reddit discussion forum, trouble calling in. A caller asking, is anyone else having trouble getting their calls connected when David takes calls from listeners? We are aware that sometimes we pick up on someone, Pat, and then I say hello, hello, and we don't hear anybody. We've done a number of different tests, and there is every indication that our system is working fine.
Yeah, we just don't know what causes it, right?
I don't know.
That's the problem.
Sometimes the callers say that they can hear me and that they're talking, but that we can't seem to hear them. but we've tested it every way we know how and are not able to replicate the issue.
And it happens maybe 1 in 5 calls, right?
Not even. Yeah, roughly like 1 in 6 or 7 calls.
But not substantial.
We're unable to root it out, to find it and to root it out. So I don't know what's going on with that. And also from our subreddit, Happy Hanukkah to David and all who celebrate it. As you know, I am culturally Jewish, but I'm not religious. And I completely forgot about the start of Hanukkah. I don't even know where my menorah is. I haven't lit a single candle. I just am not aware of, I just don't do anything like that. You know?
I had to remind you the other day that Hanukkah had started.
That's right. I only found out about Hanukkah because Pat told me about it. And I think, do we have one more here? Yes. Don't do it. Don't destroy the Keurig machine. Yeah, we got a Keurig machine, a used Keurig machine in the mail from a viewer named Matt who said, give it to Pat if you want, destroy it if you want. And a lot of people, this is not the only person saying we shouldn't destroy it, but more about that in today's voicemail segment. Join the discussion, davidpakman.com/Reddit. Well, we found the hacker, or maybe not. There's a hacker who is claiming that he stole Hillary Clinton's emails and hacked the DNC under the direction of agents from Russia's FSB, the Federal Security Service. That's run by the establishment government of Vladimir Putin. But can we believe this guy? I am very, very skeptical, and I want to talk it through with you. The hacker's name is Konstantin Kozlovsky. He worked for a hacker group called Lurk, and there's an audio recording of his supposed confession. It's in Russian. It was posted to Facebook, and it's been confirmed as authentic by The Bell, a Russian news site. Now, some of the emails in question that Kozlovsky says he obtained were eventually released by Julian Assange's WikiLeaks in July of 2016. So if this were true, it would be huge for more than one reason. First of all, the Kremlin has insisted that it was not involved in those hacking attacks. Every indication is that they were to some degree, but that would be a really big thing if this were true. Number two, Julian Assange has also insisted many times that the WikiLeaks source was not part of the Russian state, and we've long suspected that that could mean that there was some go-between that wasn't officially associated with the Russian government, but that was working on the behalf of or with the Russian government. If indeed the WikiLeaks source was a Russian hacker directed by Putin's FSB, it would be exactly the scenario that I outlined to you months ago, which is that Julian Assange may well have been telling the truth according to the letter of what he said, but not in the spirit of what he said. However, and this is a big however, I don't know that we should believe this confession. Lots of the people that this hacker is implicating in his letter are on the opposite side of the Russian government right now, and there could be any number of ways in which this is a coordinated distraction. And beyond that, would a hacker really announce themselves like this in Russia, saying something that directly contradicts what Vladimir Putin said? We know that that puts you at huge risk in Russia. So I'm skeptical all around here.
I'm skeptical too, especially because people confess to crimes that they didn't commit. And that's sometimes when they're running against losing their life or their livelihood. If he has any incentive to get some positive PR or has any reason to lie here, I just don't think we have this full story yet.
Everything about it makes me question it. And you have to remember also that this could be two-layer subterfuge. What I mean is this. If the Kremlin did direct hackers to do the hacks, but they want to try to discredit allegations that they were involved, what better thing than an obviously suspicious confession that is eventually going to be proven false? Because now that we have a confession, if this confession is eventually confirmed to be bogus, then there's a lot of people who will say, see, the hacker lied. The Kremlin didn't direct anyone to hack Hillary's email. And the truth is, even if this guy didn't do the hacking, that doesn't mean the Kremlin wasn't involved. So thinking in a way that is not on the level of how Trump can think, because Trump can't really think critically in sort of complex ways. If you're thinking more of a Putin guy, what better way to try to discredit the allegation that you were involved than to have someone falsely confess and eventually out it as a false confession?
And perhaps that's why progressives and those who think that Trump is guilty in all of this shouldn't grab onto this right away.
Absolutely. I believe that it would be not at all surprising that Vladimir Putin's Kremlin was involved in that hacking, but I am not ready to say this is the guy because every aspect of it seems very difficult to believe. Discuss this with us on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome Jessica Pieklo back to the program. She is a senior legal analyst for Rewire, which is a daily online publication covering reproductive justice. Today we are going to talk about Masterpiece Cakeshop v. Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which might be known to you as the gay wedding cake case, which is now before the Supreme Court. So Jessica, as with many of these types of cases, we can't even seem to get agreement from two sides, at least, about what the case is about. There are some who say this is about anti-LGBT discrimination, and others who say that it is a case about religious freedom. So for people who don't know even the facts of the case, what is this about?
Sure. So I'll give you guys a quick rundown of the facts. So there's a same-sex couple who walked into Masterpiece Cakeshop. They were looking for a cake to celebrate their wedding, and they had been married in Massachusetts and were a Colorado couple, and so wanted to celebrate in Colorado. And Phillips, who's the owner of the cake shop, refused to sell them a cake once he realized basically who they were and what they wanted. And he said, I won't sell a cake to you. I won't make a cake to you because I have a religious objection to same-sex marriage. The couple filed a complaint with the Colorado Commission of Human Rights. The commission did an investigation and found that the refusal to serve the couple was in violation with Colorado's anti-discrimination statute. And Colorado, like a lot of other states, has an anti-discrimination statute that says effectively you cannot discriminate against folks on all of the usual characteristics that we have in civil rights law. So that would be, race, national origin, age. But the Colorado civil rights law, as do many of the states, goes further and specifically includes sexual orientation. And so the commission very rightly said this is a problem. Phillips appealed, and the Court of Appeals said it, reaffirmed the commission's decision. And then Alliance Defending Freedom, who represents Phillips and their conservative litigation group, they filed a brief with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sat on the case 19 times before taking it up. So that in and of itself is very interesting. So that's Phillips' side. The commission side, and has been argued by the folks who have filed amici on behalf of the couple, detail the very long history that this country has of religious evangelicals in particular trying to launch religious objections to civil rights laws. The Supreme Court has already looked at this as an issue in the case of Bob Jones v. United States, where Bob Jones University tried to defend its decision to not allow housing for interracial couples on the grounds that it had a biblical objection to that. And the United States Supreme Court said it was fine for the government to pull its nonprofit tax funding status in that case. So this should be a no-brainer. The fact that it is not is something that advocates should pay attention to.
So there is an argument that some defenders of the cake baker are making, which is that this is not equivalent to we do not serve gay people in our business. They are saying they have the option to participate or not in the baking of cakes for gay weddings, which are a type of event, and that they are not actually refusing service to the couple on the basis of their identity, that they're refusing service on the basis that it's a type of event for which they don't work. Is that legally a valid distinction or argument?
Well, I think it's a pretty facetious argument. And I mean, I will, anecdotes aren't evidence, but I will just say, for example, that when I got married, I hired a bakery to bake our wedding cake. And in no way, shape, or form did they participate in the ceremony or in any way do anything that suggested they were endorsing the union that I was entering into. The folks who are defending the baker, and Phillips has made this argument as well, are trying to say that he's an artist and what he's doing is purely expressive speech. And you know, as Justice Sonia Sotomayor pointed out in oral arguments, well, there are people who consider themselves sandwich artists. Does that mean if you have Subway cater your student event that they are somehow endorsing the message of it? It's really, I mean, when you start to drill down into it, ludicrous.
What about the idea, and I'm just thinking out loud here, I mean, I happen to think that that the baker is wrong here, right? But in the interest of playing devil's advocate and really thinking it through, I was imagining a scenario where a heterosexual couple, right? Maybe it's someone related to one of the two men who were going to get married. If they were to come in and say that they were buying a cake for the gay wedding, and they were, of course, a heterosexual couple, and the individual baker said, "I don't do cakes for gay weddings," for example. Would that be different? Because again, it's not the couple that they're refusing to provide something for that's coming in to place the order would be a heterosexual couple, but the eventual use of the cake would be in a gay wedding. Does that example support the baker's argument in some way?
It's a really excellent hypothetical, and I'm glad you asked it, because what it allows us to do is really talk about, you know, the who or versus the what is how I like to describe this case, right? Is it an objection to who or to what? And your example flips that, because you're absolutely right. It's not the baker launching an objection against the person, but refusing to participate in a ceremony. If they were fine, giving the heterosexual couple or the heterosexual person the cake on their behalf, it immediately undercuts their argument, because it is absolutely then about who they are comfortable about serving. They claim it's about the what, but you know, I'm not sure if that that distinction, it's slicing the apple kind of thin, but in my mind that actually helps the couple's case, because in that sense, because if they agree to serve a heterosexual person or a heterosexual couple, regardless of what the event is, and even if it's an event that they say they object to, then they're not participating in that event with any, real, it undercuts their participation argument.
I was actually thinking of the opposite, which is if they said, even to the heterosexual couple, we don't do cakes for gay weddings. And that would actually, in some sense, strengthen their argument. In either case, we're talking about hypotheticals, though.
Sure. I mean, I certainly think that is a more compelling point to the baker's side, because it is, again, this idea of objecting to or putting forward that objection, but it doesn't change the end result, that what they are objecting to is something that is a legal right, and that is a legal right held by a traditionally discriminated against class of people. So you can dress it up in different ways, but in terms of the outcome, it is still saying, I have a religious objection to a constitutional right that you have. And historically, the law has just not recognized that, and with good reason.
Yeah, so that's kind of the bigger picture here, which is with a lot of these types of legal debates, you have a sort of butting heads of freedom from and freedom to, in the sense that the Colorado non-discrimination law, by including sexual orientation as a protected class, says that individuals who are part of that, members of that class, should be free from discrimination. And those on the other side say that our religious freedom gives us freedom to sort of exist in society in accordance with our religious laws. Isn't that really what's at issue here?
It is, except I would take that further, because the balance that you describe is absolutely an important one, and one that traditionally has not been an issue, aside from what the evangelicals have pushed, because it is possible to recognize a myriad of religious beliefs and also recognize the fundamental civil rights of people in this country. So I think there's that part of it. And then in terms of really the larger piece, I would say that this is an example, and it's been increasing really since 2010. It's sort of gone on hyperspeed under the Trump administration, of evangelicals trying to use religious objections and, quite frankly, weaponize the First Amendment as both a sword to puncture through civil rights laws and a shield from the liability that happens when they do so. I mean, frankly, we saw this setup with Hobby Lobby. They have great opening to do so now.
Yeah, that was, I mean, when the Supreme Court decided that state bans on same-sex marriage were not going to fly, it was abundantly clear at that point, and the Hobby Lobby case was one of the big notable examples, that the shift in the battle against LGBT rights was going to move to religious freedom. And still, by the way, I mention this anytime that there's an opportunity to, I don't remember the number of states, but in many states, you can still be fired for your perceived or actual membership identification as an LGBT individual. And that is a completely separate issue from that of same-sex marriage. And I don't know if you have thoughts about where that's going.
Oh, absolutely. The Supreme Court just this week refused to hear a case on that exact issue. There's currently what we call in the law a circuit split. So federal courts of appeals are not in agreement as to whether or not firing someone from the workplace because they are gay amounts to discrimination on the basis of sex under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which is the federal employment law. So that is very much an open question for debate. Now, I mean, it's always reading the tea leaves in terms of why the Supreme Court decides to take up a case and why they don't. I wrote a quick piece on this in terms of why this particular case that they considered may not have been a really good candidate, but this is absolutely an issue we are going to see because exactly what you mentioned. In many states, it's still possible to lose your job because you're gay. And there is, or it goes even further in terms of like certain gender nonconforming behaviors and stereotypes. So, that in addition to the fight over how the law recognizes the rights of transgender people too is really the burgeoning civil rights battle that we are seeing right now.
Last thing to touch on, as far as this case goes that we started today's discussion about, when might we expect to hear a decision, and what ultimately will the decision hinge on in your mind?
Okay, so the court was positively packed with press to the point where we were given assigned seats. So this is likely the biggest case, or certainly one of the biggest cases on the court's term. So that usually means an end of June decision. Particularly since they conferenced on it so long, I think this is going to be one to hash out. I would like to see it earlier in the sense that I would be hopeful that it's an easy question for the court to answer. In terms of what it hinges on, as we have seen time and time again, a lot of the outcome of this case hinges on Justice Anthony Kennedy. He has two real competing legacies here. He has his legacy of advancing LGBTQ rights, even if it has been slowly, but that's how the law works, and really working to insulate religious individuals, and in particular religious conservatives, to he's the Hobby Lobby decision to allow them space to exist in civil rights laws that they did not have the space to exist before, and with good reason. And so we'll see where he comes out in this case. He was very concerned about using civil rights laws to discriminate against the LGBTQ population. He was as concerned that ruling against the baker would somehow endorse what was argued by the baker as religious discrimination by the state against evangelicals. So it's going to be a close case. I would expect a pretty split along ideological lines decision.
All right, we will be following it. We've been speaking with Jessica Pieklo, Senior Legal Analyst for Rewire. Great to talk to you again.
Thank you so much for having me back. Always such a pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Senator Bernie Sanders is now making headlines because he's in no uncertain terms calling for the resignation of President Trump. This is another voice, one of the more prominent voices that's calling for Trump's resignation after the numerous resignations related to allegations of serial sexual assault of women. He and Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and many others are now saying, listen, Al Franken resigned, Roy Moore was repudiated insofar as he lost on Tuesday. We've seen other resignations. It's time for Donald Trump to resign. Now, what's interesting is that Bernie Sanders is making headlines for this now, even though he's actually been saying this for some time. But I guess given the political climate and recent news stories, it's getting more attention. Here's Bernie Sanders saying this on CNN.
there has been a growing number of your Democratic colleagues who called for President Trump's resignation over allegations of sexual assault. I know you haven't gone that far in the past. I wonder, are you willing to go that far now? Do you think the president should resign?
No, look, that's what I said. What I said, when Al Franken announced that he was going to resign, and I was asked on a TV show my view, I said, look, Franken apologized for what he did. What he did was inappropriate. He apologized for it. And then he said, I think I have to resign. You got a president who has been accused by many, many women of harassment, to say the least. This is a guy who was on a tape seen by everybody in America, essentially bragging about his sexual assault of women. Do I think under those considerations of Al Franken resign, do I think the president should resign? I do. Do I think he will? I don't. But yes, I do think he should resign.
Crazy Bernie with his wacky ideas. The White House, through Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, just a delightful human being she is, continues to say all the women are just lying. They're just not telling the truth. And I really have split thoughts about the resignation thing. On the one hand, I do believe that Trump would do anything possible to avoid getting impeached, and that includes resigning in advance of that. But on the other hand, based on what we've seen Trump do so far, I can imagine him caught holding a gun with dead bodies littering the floor around him, and he'd say it was fake news, the pictures were doctored, and still not resign. But the good thing here is the pressure, right? The pressure is building for Trump to go on three different reasons. There are three completely separate areas of pressure being placed on Trump to go. Number one, more than a dozen sexual assault allegations from women over a period of decades, none of which have been disproven, merely just called lies as a sort of blanket statement by Trump and Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And pressure is building on an investigation about those dozen-plus accusers of Donald Trump. That's number one. Number two, we've got the Russia investigation, right, which is getting closer and closer to Trump every single week. We've got 4 indictments, 2 guilty pleas already. Every week we learn more about what seems to indubitably be Donald Trump's knowledge of what was going on, which ultimately may be proven beyond any doubt. That's number two. And thirdly, you've got the growing concern over Donald Trump's cognitive state and possible cognitive decline and dementia, which would, under the 25th Amendment, justify the removal or resignation of Donald Trump. Just one of these three angles could take down a president. But of course, Teflon Don. No guarantee that any of them will.
And the problem is that he's claiming innocence in all of these. I mean, with the sexual assault allegations.
Doesn't know the women.
Al Franken admitted to some of them.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is saying he didn't do it. Michael Flynn may have pleaded guilty, but Trump is not going to.
Yeah.
And then the last one there, I mean, Trump's doctor says that he's the healthiest president we've ever had.
Healthiest. He went to Wharton. His uncle knew about nuclear, which is very serious, and all that stuff. Yeah, so he's denying all three of these, but no doubt about it, there are three paths here. And like I've been saying before, the best path for Democrats might not be any of these three. It might be vote them out in the midterms and then crush Trump and Republicans in 2020. And it's sort of starting to get going now, right? Just to be super clear with you, we're less than 11 months from the midterm elections and under 3 years from the 2020 election. It is time to get moving now. And early in 2018, we're going to start talking about some of the key midterm races you can get involved in. And in fact, I'm going to talk about one possible race on tomorrow's program. But to go back to Bernie and his call for Trump's resignation, the Trumpists want to write this off as political nonsense. Don't be confused. It's not normal to have multiple members of the opposition party in a serious and sober manner calling for the resignation of the president of the United States. The left is going to be portrayed as just being partisan bomb throwers and calling for the resignation. It's not normal to have this degree this early in a presidency of opposing elected officials calling for the resignation of a president.
And Democrats know what the results are of impeaching Trump, too. It's just putting Mike Pence or maybe Paul Ryan in there. They're not going to get their own guy in charge.
No doubt about that. Donald Trump spent some time in a few southern states in the last week. He was in Alabama supporting the now failed Senate candidate Roy Moore, but he also went to Pensacola, Florida, where I recently visited, and our friends from the Ring of Fire Network have their studio there. And in Pensacola, Trump was introduced by Republican State Senator Doug Broxson, and the crowd went bonkers in a positive way when Broxson alluded to the end times getting closer as a result of Donald Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I've mentioned this before, and it's worth mentioning again. The right-wing evangelical Christians that, quote, support Israel, support it for supernatural and delusional religious reasons. Those evangelical Christians aren't supporting or defending Jews to the extent that they ever do because they are against discrimination or anti-Semitism or whatever. Those right-wing evangelicals support Israel because they believe that their support of Israel, not of Jews as a community, is going to bring about the second coming of Jesus or accelerate the rapture or the end times or whatever version of this delusion they subscribe to. So anyway, Doug Broxson says when introducing Trump that Trump's Jerusalem decision, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, will get us more quickly to the end times. You've got to understand what he's referencing when he says it. And the crowd just loves it. Check it out.
President Trump promised to protect our religious freedom. Now, I don't know about you, but when I heard that Jerusalem, where the King of Kings,
Look at the woman in the background.
where our soon-coming king is going to return back to Jerusalem, it's because of President Trump declared Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel.
Right. What's up with how Trump and some of these other guys pronounce Jerusalem? Remember Trump, maybe it was because of his whatever issue he was having with his teeth during that speech, but last time he called it something like Jerusalem.
He has a tough time with pronunciation in general.
Yeah, it's difficult. So this is funny in two ways. First of all, the king coming back to Jerusalem is a reference to the end times, yet people are cheering. I guess it's because it means everyone dies and the good Christians end up in heaven while everyone else goes to hell when the end times hit. And I guess the people standing behind Doug Broxson think that they'll end up in heaven. But it's also funny because this is a political decision by Trump, right? How could one out of nearly 200 countries recognizing a city as the capital of a country cause Jesus to decide to come back? Is Jesus waiting around for the right time to come back to Earth? And when in 2017, one president in one country said Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, well, that does it. Now Jesus is going to come back. It's really confusing to me when I hear this logic.
They always claim that's about to happen, too.
Oh, it's really close.
You think it would have happened by now.
I always get confused when I hear about the end times and the rapture because not having these evangelical sensibilities myself, for me, when someone says the rapture or the end times, that sounds bad, not like something that I want to see happen. It really takes a totally different worldview and barometer about life to hear we're close to the end times and to cheer that like it's a good thing.
It's almost sad in two ways. One, because they believe in all of this, but the second reason is that they just don't seem to value their own lives that much and apparently want this to happen.
Because they'll end up in heaven. They'll end up in heaven and all the bad people are going to end up in hell. And I guess for them, that's some kind of sweet justice or something like that. Let's go to your voicemails, 2192 David P. We talked about this Keurig that we got as a gift from Matt. We talked about maybe destroying it or maybe giving it to Pat or whatever. And the Eggman called in and is completely definitive in his opposition to the destruction of the Keurig. Take a listen to this.
Dave, you should give the Keurig machine to Pat and never mention it again. Smashing it would be the stupidest thing you could do. It's the R word of things to do. It's a perfectly functioning, working coffee machine that you're going to destroy, and then it's going to go into a landfill and be trash. That's the exact opposite of what us liberals do. We reduce, reuse, and recycle. And if it can be reused, you reuse it. It's the smart thing to do. You're not as stupid as... Why would you want to smash it? You know, like those people? Gosh, yes. We complained about the Keurig because it takes 2 cups of water to quickly boil 1 cup. It wastes a little bit. But you lose water with anything. Also, if you don't like how it tastes, so what? Other people do. Pat does. His taste buds are more burnt off than yours.
Yeah.
It is very stupid to destroy that thing. Shalom, brother.
Okay, shalom, Eggman. I like how he calls it the Keurig as opposed to Keurig. Listen, number one, in terms of throwing it in a landfill, isn't plastic recyclable these days? I mean, the Keurig is made of plastic, so it might be recyclable. But you actually, I gave Pat the opportunity to test it and say, do we want to have this as the office coffee machine for Pat? I wouldn't go near it, trust me. And it doesn't seem to actually work correctly, does it?
Well, as the audience knows, I use the reusable pods as not to waste too much plastic.
Sure.
and this is a Keurig 2.0.
Sure.
And it doesn't work with reusable pods, nor does it work with any of the off-brand pods. So I'm just done with it. I'm done with Keurig altogether.
So I don't get it. What would you'd have to buy only the Keurig brand?
You'd have to buy the Keurig pods, which I'm not willing to do.
How much do those cost compared to like the other alternatives?
I don't know. I'm just so upset with this. I nearly smashed it out in the kitchen there.
Pat actually brought it out to the shared kitchen, and the next thing, within about 90 seconds, I'd say, I heard a banging and then a really loud conversation that seemed agitated between Pat and another tenant in the building.
It had to be restrained, and I knew that if I was going to destroy it, I probably should wait to do it on camera.
Yeah,
but
right.
In some ways, it's too late.
Yeah. So anyway, it's in Pat's car now. But no, I'm kidding. It's still here, but I guess people don't like the destruction idea. Great bonus show today. Get access to the bonus show by going to davidpakman.com/membership. Get the free calendar with your membership at davidpakman.com/calendar18. And Patreon is good again. They've rescinded their fee increase, and you can go to patreon.com/davidpakmanshow and also access the bonus show with a $5 a month plan.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.